All right.
Yeah.
Hi, Olive.
Hello, Sophie.
Hi. Nice to speak to you again. I was really intrigued by our conversation a few weeks ago about like just your views and things. So before we get chatting, maybe you could just tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Right. Yes, sure, certainly. I've been doing this for 25 years, which makes me sound really old. I picked up the skill to, um, as part of a training program I did, and they were talking about people who are good at literacy look up and see words, and people who aren't look down at the floor and feel embarrassed. So they were
Mm.
talking about spelling at the time. And so I thought, this is really interesting because I've never been able to spell well. And so I walked around a few other people who were in the class and over coffee and said, "Can you do that?" And they went, "Yeah, I can do that." Or some of them said, "I have no idea what he was talking about." And so I have a local special needs school very near where I live, where I knew the deputy head. And I walked in there on the Monday morning and said, "Have you got anybody who can't spell in school?" And they said, "We've got hundreds. Which ones do you want to talk to?" I said, "Well, I've just learned something that I think could be really useful." And these kids were in special needs. So if you can teach kids in special needs, you can teach anybody, as it were, in my view. And so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
started teaching, and I've been doing it ever since. And I have training programs, and we do one-to-one coaching, and I've got practitioners around the world who do the same thing as I do. And so it's just extraordinary. It's a really little skill that we are not teaching our children. And some children pick it up naturally, some children don't. And the children who don't end up being diagnosed dyslexic. And so my view is, if we were teaching this really at a really young age, this little skill, or we incorporate it in the school's phonics program, so they complement each other, they're part of each other, but when teachers are taught about the phonics program, they are not told about this little skill that they need, that children need. And as I say, some kids, the majority of kids will actually work it out for themselves after quite a few repetitions, but some kids just
Mhm.
don't. And one of the things that I have discovered over the period of time is I've worked with all sorts of neurodivergent children, and they are nearly all very, very good visual thinkers. And so they've got lots and lots of pictures in their head. Those are the ones they have in their head, not necessarily the ones they see. And so they once you get them using those pictures in their head for spelling and reading, they are really very, very effective.
Yeah, no, look, we've talked about this before, and I agree like totally with what you're saying and what you're thinking. So, just out of interest, I have my educational board games. How do
Yeah.
you think children should be taught how to read then? Do you think they should start off with phonics or orthographic mapping? How do you think it should work?
Well, let me just explain orthographic mapping for anybody who's listening to this, because they may well not have heard of this. There is a place in your brain called the visual word form area, and it's at the back of your head here. And the it's a really important, vital place for literacy, either reading or spelling or handwriting for that matter. And the three things get locked together in that. They get the sound of the word, the meaning of the word, and what the word looks like. Now, those three things get locked together in there, and then children can just see a word and recognize it. And they also know what it means. And it's called orthographic mapping. Some teachers in school will know the expression rapid autonomic naming, which is the same thing. Basically, you see a word and you know what it is. You don't have to
Mhm.
decode it. Now, children can learn that preschool, ideally sort of 3 to 4 preschool. They can learn how to do orthographic mapping and recognize words for really simple words. So what they call CVC words, which is really short words. So like mum, dad, cat, dog,
Yeah.
cow, all those sort of words, they can start to recognize them. And children can be phonically going ter, but then if they know what that looks like, they know what it sounds like, and they know what it means, then they will start automatically mapping that into their visual word form area. And then when you come along with more complicated phonics, such as, letters together and stuff like that, they've got a much firmer basis to build off of.
Mm. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, we were talking about how important mental imagery is. A big thing for me when I made the board games was to have that mental imagery, because not only do I think it helps, but I think it engages children more.
Oh,
Do
exactly.
you find that as well?
It's fun. The minute
Yeah,
we start talking about pictures, they're laughing. And
yeah,
they might have very silly pictures, but that's their imagination. That's all part of the same thing. And if you can get a child who is happy in what they're doing, they're going to be in a much more effective learning state. And so they're going to be learning more easily.
yeah. No, no, exactly. And just, I was reading a couple of articles yesterday about the government wanting to introduce more play-based learning. Um, what do you think are the benefits of that? I mean, I know there are so many.
Oh, I mean, I just see it as that when they're enjoying themselves, they're going to learn more, and they don't need to be taught this. You can actually, I mean, I saw a video one day of a big sandpit in a tray, and the child had got lollipop sticks with pictures drawn on them. And so she was doing, that's a house, and that's mum and dad, and that's the dog. And I thought it would be so much better if those pictures had just got mum, dad, cat and dog, and whatever house written on those pictures. They would start associating those words with the pictures. And
Yeah, yeah.
you're not, totally play based. You're not actually teaching them anything. They're just playing with lollipop sticks and pictures. And I think that's a brilliant way to get going. But it's like
Yeah.
they're having fun. They're just associating the words with the pictures, and then they can move on to words on their own. But to start with, I mean, children of 3 years old, 4 years old, our heads are full of pictures. If anybody's got a small child, they will know their heads are full of pictures. And so it's an ideal time to get them to start picturing, just recognizing words. We're not teaching them, so it's definitely play-based. We're actually just enabling them to start absorbing words. I mean, they all know, for example, they know, quite a lot of them know the McDonald's sign, don't they? That's a picture.
Yeah. That's true. There's no escaping that one. Everyone knows that one. Oh, okay. And just moving on then. So obviously we said that play-based imagery, mental imagery is really important. And I really agree with that. I taught my children how to read, and I very much used the visuals and things like that. We know that's really important with children with dyslexia. How does that help them? And why do you think our educational board games are so popular with the SEN community?
Well, I think they're visual for starters. They're colourful. They have got individual words that they can play with. They've got all the elements there. But on the other hand, I would say we are starting to be very unpopular and saying, does dyslexia really exist? Because if I'll give you an interesting statistic. In my 25 years, I have not yet met a dyslexic who is reliably visualizing words. So we teach them to reliably visualize words, and they turn around invariably, small children, and say, "Oh, I didn't know I was meant to be doing that. I can do that. That's easy," because they've got these great pictures in their heads. So they find
Mm.
adding the words onto their pictures quite simple. It's a different case when you're talking to adults, because adults have developed so many beliefs and coping strategies and everything else about this is impossible, and I don't want to even discuss learning to read anymore. But if we were doing this with young children, I think the incidence of real dyslexia, is what I would call it, would be dramatically reduced. I'll tell
Mm.
you a little story that I had. I had a student who was on the gifted and talented register, and they were extremely good at reading, but really poor at spelling. And their Senko said, "I don't know what to do with this because this isn't normal. So they must be dyslexic." And I literally, they came and saw me half an hour, and they read out a sentence. And then I said, "Well, you've just read that word. Now look up and see if you can still imagine reading that word." And they went, "Yeah, okay." So I said, "Spell it." And they spelt it. They could even spell it in
Mm.
reverse because they got all the letters stuck on the wall. And the
Wow.
6 words later, they were not, you couldn't possibly call them dyslexic. They were just, they found it so easy. And they looked at me and said, "Well, shouldn't this have happened before? This child was like 15. And if this had happened at 4, I wouldn't have had all this aggro, and my parents wouldn't have had all this aggro." And it is all down to this really, really small thing called orthographic mapping that I
Yeah.
don't blame the teachers for, because I shouldn't imagine there's hardly a teacher in the country who has had orthographic mapping explained to them, apart from
Mm.
the ones I've taught. And so it's not surprising that we are not teaching this in primary school. And it's not in teacher training in England. It is now in teacher training in Ireland, but we haven't
Mm.
managed to convert anybody to teacher training in England. And if we were doing that in parallel with the very, very early age, early phonics, not before it gets complicated, then it'd be much easier for the children.
Mm. Just I want to point out, I remember when we last spoke, you got me to do that. You got me to spell, I think, the word giraffe. And without thinking, I did automatically look up
Yep.
to see the word and I spelt it. And I hadn't realized, that you do that. So yeah, you're making a lot of sense. I just wanted to ask them, what are your opinions on educators and professionals who maybe don't agree with this, or why aren't they teaching it if it sort of scientifically makes sense?
Well, I think there's several things here. We've been teaching it a different way. And phonics was introduced, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, something like that. And they were absolutely convinced it was absolutely the way to teach. Well, it has a problem in the English language, um, because English is not perfectly phonetic. If
Mm.
you were born Italian or Spanish or one of the northern countries, I can't remember which, have perfectly phonetic languages, then phonics for everything is much, much easier. You can still use mental imagery for to accelerate word recognition, but it's much easier in those languages. English isn't like that. English,
Mm.
as you know well, has got all sorts of oddities, rules, words that break the rules. And then you come on to homophones. Those are the
Yeah.
wonderful words which have got the same sound and mean something completely different, like where and where. And then you
Yeah.
come on to silent letters, where you
Yeah.
don't even sound them out, and you're meant to know that they exist. I mean, this is where auditory is fine, but it isn't the whole picture. You need visual as well. And so
Yeah.
I focus on is visual, and then then they can use their phonic knowledge as well for, well, of course, for brand new words they've never seen. And there is another couple of things I want to add to that. There is one real oversight is that is in plain sight if you notice what you're doing. If you're teaching a 3-year-old phonics, they will tend to start reading words by word recognition if they're nouns, not if they are non-nouns, because
Yeah.
the nouns have got a picture, a sound, and what it looks like. And those three things are what we do with orthographic mapping. So if you start teaching nouns, it will be faster. Now, this message could go out to any teacher who is teaching 4 and 5-year-olds, whether they're teaching phonics or not. Teach them nouns first, because nouns get them into orthographic mapping, whereas non-nouns don't. I mean, if you think
Yeah.
of the word bug, for example, what happens in your head when you think of bug?
I think I automatically look up and I imagine an ant or a beetle
Right,
or something.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. If I
exactly.
say to you the word "the," what's going on?
Is
Precisely.
it the or the? That's another one as well.
Yeah,
Either or either. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
But it doesn't sort of land anywhere in your head because it's not
Mm.
got, you can't
Can't
orthographically
visualize
map
it.
it. And
Yeah.
so I would say all you need to do, it really is in plain sight. You can see what's happening to a child. That if you just
Mm.
listen to a child who's trying to do phonics initially, and you will see it invariably that they do better at words which are nouns.
Yeah. I can totally see how that makes sense. Even if I, imagine the word dog, I'm looking up thinking of a dog. Yeah, it does make sense. So I do wonder just, I wonder if we're going to reach a point where, there's a lot of there's a lot of school children who are not getting the traditional ways or getting the way everyone is teaching them. And, as I'm sure you're aware, some children are going into secondary school with, a reading age of, I don't know, 5, 6, 7-year-old. So something has to be done, And I remember with my board games, my son was struggling, and I didn't want to sit back and let him struggle. I came up with a solution. So I'm just wondering, do you think, especially for SEND children, do you think teachers will be open to more ideas and more resources and
Hope,
feedback from
I
others?
hope they will be. I mean, we teach people in a couple of hours. It doesn't take a long time to get the hang of this. All they've got to do is to have an open mind and start to picture their own pictures, if you like. One of the really important things I've learned over 25 years is you've got to get a teacher doing this for themselves. Because if they aren't doing it themselves, there's no power on earth that they're going to teach somebody else. But most of them who are good at literacy are doing it out of conscious awareness anyway. So you have to give them a difficult word, like I gave you giraffe, or some
Yeah,
more difficult word like conscientious or something, so that oh, yes, oh, I did see it.
yeah,
So you have to get them to consciously realize what is going on. But of
yeah.
course, they're very able readers and spellers, so they are doing it out of conscious awareness. They don't have to
Mm,
think about it anymore. And it's always difficult to get somebody back to thinking about how do they do that. It's like riding a bicycle, you learn to ride a bicycle and somebody says, well, how do you do that? If you try and explain it to somebody else, it's not that very easy. You've got to actually feel it for yourself.
yeah, no, no, exactly. And this is why you just said about feeling it. I'm a big believer in physical games and physical things like,
Yeah.
I had a lot of people say to me, "Oh, why didn't you do a digital game? Why is it not online?" And I was like, well, I think my belief is that children learn better when they're physically engaged and physically touching it, and touching the word or touching the counter. Like, do you agree with that? Or do you think, especially like with technology and
Well,
AI, do you think, it's
I,
changing or?
I think the worst problem is that they're looking down at, which is
Mm,
something else I need to mention. If they're looking down, I mean, anybody who's listening to you or me can probably see from time and time you look up and you're looking at pictures of something. Right. When you're with a tablet or a phone, you're looking
yeah.
down at it. Now, your visual field is up there, your auditory is sideways, so you're listening or speaking, and down is your emotions. So, what are these children who are struggling doing? They're doing negative emotions. So
Mm,
please get them out of their emotions, which means stop, when you're asking anybody to read something, don't have it flat on the table. Just prop it up a
mm,
bit. Or if they fail at that, prop it right up here, like a newspaper. As an
mm.
adult, if we're reading a newspaper, it's up here. If we're reading a book,
Yeah,
it's probably propped up on our knee. We are not looking flat on the table most of the time. And
yeah,
that for children who are SEND, who are struggling, is really bad news for them, is to get them looking flat down on the table. And again, the teachers haven't been taught that. So I'm not blaming the teachers. I am blaming, to a certain extent, teacher training and people not looking at the blindingly obvious of what's going on. The amount of children who I always say to a child I'm working with, can you read me a sentence? And they'll put the book flat on the table because that's what they've been taught to do in school. They will read a sentence and they'll be stumbling around words. And I go, right, now put the book up and have another go at that sentence. Lo and behold, they can read it better. And it's
wow.
like, how did that happen? You know,
But not only that, Olive, I was reading again another article about reception children are going into school holding a book and trying to swipe it or tap it like a tablet, I mean, I find it staggering that a
staggering.
child cannot recognize a book or not know even how to read a book properly.
Yes, and you mentioned something about AI earlier, and
Mm,
will AI take over? And I have a history of working in the IT industry, so I sort of know something about this. And
okay.
I think several things I'd like to comment on that is one is the AI will probably take over the very mundane activities but I don't consider reading is a mundane activity. Um,
Mm,
the What we want to do is keep our children being as creative and imaginative as possible because we've got difficult challenges to solve in the world and we need creative problem solvers basically. So that's one way of looking at it is don't
yeah,
don't think that, and if we don't teach them to read, they're going to miss out on so much. And also you think, you go into a restaurant and want to order a meal, you're not going to have technology to help you order that meal. You're going to look at the
yeah,
menu. I remember one client who was a Scottish lady who flew up with her children after, to Scotland after I'd been working with them, and the first thing they did was to start reading the signs, for when which plane was going at which location
yeah,
at what time. And you're not going to have barraging of everybody of those timetables being done auditory. You need to be
yeah,
able to do you need to be able to read, and spelling is not so critical these days because we've got really simple tools to help us out. But actually, I've been reading some research recently, which I totally agree with, which is writing, is really good for the brain,
Mm,
as opposed to typing. And
yeah.
I've tried it out on myself, and if I'm feeling a bit confused, and I just put in my logbook, I'm now choosing to write, and I just start writing. Within minutes, my brain is a lot clearer.
Yeah, that is very true. I think writing is really important still. I mean, for me, with my children, if they have like a homework assignment, they can either do it on the computer or do it by hand. I
Yeah,
always say to them, at least start off by hand,
yeah,
because I believe the emotions come out more, the imagination come out more, and then if you need, you can then type it up if you really want. But I do think handwriting is still a very important skill.
absolutely. And if you've got a problem with children looking down when they're handwriting, because they will,
Mm,
then stick a piece of paper on the wall and ask them to write the same thing on the wall, and you will be
yeah,
amazed how much better they can write, because you're
yeah,
getting people out of these emotions. And we've got enough emotional children around at the moment. We really want to
yeah,
do some clever things to try and help them look up and stop being so fed up about themselves and so
yeah.
emotional.
Well, exactly. And, I think our time is nearly coming to an end, which is a shame because, as always, Olive, I feel like we could talk for hours. You're a really fascinating lady, who speaks a lot of sense. And, the end of the day, I think both of us, especially, talked about for myself, I just genuinely want to help children.
Yeah,
And this is why I just came up with these board games because I saw it helped my son as soon as, I gave him a toy car and we were playing, he was more engaged to learn. So I just hope others, look at different resources and different ways. So you can, there's many different roads to get there. And I think teachers and parents should be open to many ideas.
yeah, exactly. And the most important thing is to try it out. And
Mm,
if it doesn't work, then you can contact me, and you can get some free advice, because we know it works for children. And what's more, it'll work for children with all sorts of diagnoses, including ADHD and autism.
yeah,
These kids are all highly visual thinkers. What we're
yeah,
doing is giving them a way to be visual thinkers and do literacy.
absolutely. I think it's a great place to end it, Olive. So let's stop there, and then when you can upload and you leave your details, and I'll leave mine.
Yeah,
And hopefully some people will get in touch and get any advice or
yeah.
help if they need it.
Yeah, and I do recommend people look at your games, especially for
Mm,
little ones. The And maybe we could have a chat about for the 3-year-olds, because that's where
yeah.
it all starts.
Uh,
We've got to make
no,
it
no,
as simple as
exactly.
possible.
And I always say start young. I went to the basics with my child, well, with my daughter at 2. It's not like, she didn't have time for playing or being a normal toddler. It's not, I just thought, why not start young when your brain is so, fresh?
And,
So I
and
agree. Why not start younger?
okay, right, you are.
Anyway, thank you, Olive.
Thank you. Speak to you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.